This is episode 314 of Jumble Think.
T minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to Jumble Think, where we interview dreamers, makers, innovators, and influencers all about their journey of turning their dreams and ideas into reality. Along the way, we're going to share some tips on how you can turn your own dreams and ideas into reality too. On today's show, we are talking about the story of two pandemics. More about that in a moment. Whether you're a new listener or a longtime fan, if you've never subscribed to Jumble Think, head on over to your favorite place to listen to podcasts, search for Jumble Think, and click that magical subscribe button. You can find us on places like Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Play, Pandora, and more. Links to all of those amazing places can be found at jumblethink.com. Now let's join today's conversation. Hey there, friends. Welcome to Jumble Think. My name is Michael Woodward. I am your host, and we have a very important episode today. Now, it's been a while since we've done a topical episode. If you're new to Jumble Think, we do a lot of interviews, but we also do topical episodes. And traditionally, we do one interview a week, one topical episode a week. And we've just had so many guests lately that it's been hard to get some of these topical episodes in. As I was thinking about today's show, I thought it was super important to talk about today's topic. We're calling it the story of two pandemics. And of course, the first one is the one that's in every news cycle. It's on TV, it's on radio, it's in the lunchroom at work, it's wherever you go, you're hearing about it, and that's the coronavirus, COVID-19, along with some other wonderful names for that too. We're not going to talk about that so much. I am not a doctor. I don't have a PhD of any sort, so I am not informed enough to talk about that disease. Nor are a lot of people who are sharing their opinions talking about that disease qualified to talk about it. Seems to be a lot of experts that really don't have any expertise other than being a talking head on TV. I don't want to add to that noise. What I do want to talk about, though, today is the second pandemic, and that's the pandemic of fear. It's one that we face every day in life, and it's one that we're facing more and more with this coronavirus and what we're hearing. So I'm going to be talking a lot about the story of that, the story of fear and how we need to face it, whether it's this pandemic of coronavirus, whether it's in our work life, whether it's with our finances or our family or the things that we have to face in our own lives. Fear is something that seems to grip the thought process of many of us, and to be honest, probably all of us in our lives. And it's amazing what we fear. So we're going to talk a little bit about pandemics. We're going to talk a little bit about epidemics. We're going to talk a little bit about the story of fear and why fear is a pandemic that we don't have to buy into. This is all, of course, going to tie back to coronavirus to an extent, but it's also going to tie back to our daily lives and how we approach the world around us. Fear is a horrible place to operate from, so we need to get the vaccine for this and treat the fear so that we can move forward with life. Now let's kick this conversation off by simply defining a couple key words. The first one is epidemic, which is a term that is often broadly used to describe any problem that has grown out of control. An epidemic is defined as an outbreak of a disease that occurs over a wide geographic area and affects an exponentially high proportion of the population. An epidemic is an event in which a disease is actively spreading. In contrast, the term pandemic relates to a geographic spread and is used to describe a disease that affects a whole country or an entire world. On March 11th, yeah, that's right, 2020, the World Health Organization, also known as WHO, and not to be mixed up with the band, but the World Health Organization characterized the new coronavirus, COVID-19, as a pandemic. This gives us kind of a context for talking both about the disease and also about fear. If we just look at that epidemic, I mean, fear is an epidemic. It is a term often broadly used to describe any problem that has grown out of control. We are dealing with fear in this pandemic and it has grown out of control. When it dominates every conversation, when it comes up in every meeting, when it is talked about in every email you get, you have to start saying, are we rationally looking at the situations we're facing? This I think really has gone from an epidemic of fear to a pandemic of fear. Before we move on and talk a little bit about fear, I really want to step back and say, I am not a doctor. I am not a PhD. I am not a scientist. I cannot tell you about coronavirus and what you should need to know. I can only repeat what other people have said. Wash your hands, stay away from people who are sick, give people space, don't gather in groups, on and on and on. And you've already heard that, so I'm not going to go on a huge conversation about what you need to be doing to stay safe. The problem with coronavirus is simply we don't know. We don't have really good statistics and data, both here in the U.S. and globally. We don't have full picture of the data. So we don't know if this is a pandemic that's taking 2% of the victims who get sick or less than 1%. There's numbers being thrown around. And when we look back, my guess is it's probably not going to be as bad as we thought it is. But again, I'm not a scientist. I don't know. That said, that doesn't mean our lives have to be driven by fear because of this pandemic. We have taken one pandemic and turned it into two, which is mass hysteria around this conversation. We are not just giving it its due, but we're overemphasizing what's going on. Some of that's coming from a caution of an abundance of caution. Say that right? An abundance of caution. Some of it comes from, if you didn't get this already, that the media is capitalizing on this, that the news organizations who are not about sharing news but are about ratings and getting viewers so that they turn into ad dollars, they're capitalizing on this. Does that mean it shouldn't be covered? Absolutely not. It definitely needs to be covered. I just wonder sometimes if our coverage is out of proportion to what's actually going on. And all of this stems back, again, to we just don't know. What you don't know then drives the conversation. Well, we don't know what the stats are. We don't know how bad this is. We don't know the side effects. We just don't have a history of it. And out of that abundance of caution, we've pushed into a place of probably overreaction. And again, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying simply that from an observation standpoint and from the conversations I've had with a lot of people who are way smarter than me, it seems like all of us are coming to the conclusion that maybe we're overreacting. We look at the stock market, and yes, there's an economic cost to this disease, but should it be going down the way it is? Probably not. We look at some of the travel bans or quarantines. Are they overreacting? I don't know. They could be. We simply don't know. And what that leads to is a driving force of fear, capitalized by the media, the news that is told because of being capitalistically driven and money driven. The story is driven by that place of fear. More people we can get watching, the more money we make, the more this turns out. Now, I'm not saying all these journalists have bad motivators. I would actually say that most of them don't. I think that they're being swept up in this tide of fear also. And fear is something that we should stop and define here. Fear can be defined both as a noun and as a verb. As a noun, it's an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that something or someone is dangerous, likely to cause pain, or is a threat. The verb version is to be afraid of someone or something as likely to be dangerous, painful, or threatening. Our fear is an instinct. It is something that goes back to the predator and prey. It goes back to survival. Many of our fears are irrational. They are out of places of emotion, and because of that, we overreact. Right now, we're facing that pandemic. We're facing the fear of this unknown, this unquantifiable disease, this unmeasured disease at this point. And fear steps in. How is fear personifying itself in our lives? Simply put, the other day I go to the grocery store to get toilet paper because we're out, and it's impossible to find. I have to go to the next store and the next store to find a simple package of toilet. Now, what we know about the disease is not that it's a GI disease, that it doesn't cause diarrhea or anything like that. That's not one of the symptoms. So why would we be operating in a place of hoarding or grabbing or over-purchasing that? Simply put, it's driven by fear. Fear is driving much of the conversation of caution and closures and of shutting down sporting events. Is this unwise? I don't know. You don't know, and neither do the scientists really. It's a precaution, and that just feeds into the fear. We look at the stock market in the slump. We see it drop. All of that is driven by the speculation of fear. Now, there are some specific industries, maybe like airlines or cruise ships or other fundamentals that tie back to specific industries that are impacted legitimately by coronavirus. If people are traveling less, then yeah, those specific industries should be hit. And there are some supply chain issues, now getting a little bit more technical, where the items to make an iPhone or to make a computer or to make something that relies heavily on an Asian driven and now probably European driven aren't accessible because of the quarantines and people not working in those spaces. The good news is that we don't have to respond to those fears completely. We can choose to say, you know what, there are a lot of things that we don't know. And I'm not going to let those drive my emotions to what and how I respond. There are precautions that you can be taken that mitigate some of the risks so that you can lower the fear. And I think that that's the big thing right now. We've gotten so trapped in the response of emotion that we've lost the sense of truth of the reality of data. As a web developer, I love data, and I can think of times I've sat down with clients and talked about maybe their website or their ad campaign, and when we look at their data, we find something very simple, that their data doesn't correlate with the emotions and expectations they think. Oh, this page is more important than that. And then they find out that their customer really doesn't care about the same things that they do. Data gives us information so that we can make decisions. We're very early in this whole epidemic, that we don't have good data. And instead of slowing down, stepping back, and being precautious, we're responding in an overabundance of fear. And that's not a great place to live in. That's how the stock market is taking a big hit. That's how some of these quarantines are happening. It's not tied to reality. It's tied to the emotion of fear. Now, I have tied a lot of today's conversations about two pandemics back to the coronavirus. Fear as the one pandemic and coronavirus as the other. But I want you to step back with me right now. We look at the fear with coronavirus because it's obvious, it's in front of us, it's something we're facing right now. But there are fears that are holding you back from chasing your dreams and ideas. The fear of the unknown, the fear of failure, the fear of letting people down, the fear of what people will think of you. When you have dreams and ideas, the pandemic of fear is easy to set up at a micro level for your life, taking over your world. When we step back and we look at your life versus coronavirus, there are things that are legitimate in the fear coronavirus. There's death, there's sickness, there's the rapid spread of the disease. These are all rational. These all make sense. We simply don't know. And there's this fear that is sparked by them. Now transfer that over to your life. You have an idea. You want to start a business, and the fears start kicking in. You have some rational fears. If I leave my job, I won't have the stability to have the income coming in while I start my new endeavor. Well, that's a fear. I won't have the money that I need. And there might be legitimacy to that fear, or you might have $2 million in the bank and you're going, well, I can take this risk for the next 5 years and not worry about surviving because I have all this money. Well, there's a fear versus reality too. Now, for you, Chasing your dream or idea might be as simple as maybe people will reject my idea and not like it. And so you have this fear of being humiliated or this fear of reputation. That might be your fear. And you look at it rationally and you go, that's completely a not irrational fear. People are excited about my idea. People think it's a good idea. People are engaged with it. When I share it with people, there seems to be a market for it. So when you're chasing your dreams, when you're chasing your ideas, you may be facing a pandemic, a personal pandemic or epidemic of fear. Well, what we're going to do here is we're going to take a break. And when we come back, I'm going to give you some tips to face the fears that you may be facing. Some of these can be applied to the whole coronavirus, but most of these are about your dreams and ideas. I really wanted to take these two pandemics to contrast them so that we could have this conversation about how to overcome your fears, how to face your fears when chasing those dreams and ideas. So we're going to take a break right here. When we come back, we're talking more about facing your fears and how the epidemic of fear doesn't have to drive your life. Chasing big ideas and dreams is hard to do, but chasing them alone, it's the death march of making those dreams a reality. So why not join a group of people just like you who have amazing dreams and ideas, who know that they're created for something awesome? Why not join that community where we're having conversations about the failures that we're facing, about the successes, about the obstacles that we're trying to overcome? When you join a community of people just like you may not have the answer, but that community may have it for you. And by sharing the journey together, we can overcome the obstacles that we each face. So where do you find a community like that? Well, why not join the Jumblethink Facebook group? We're a growing group of dreamers, of idea makers are gathering together to walk through the process of turning those dreams and ideas into reality together. How do you find the group? Head on over to jumblethink.com. You can find a link to our Facebook page. If you're already a friend on Facebook, you can find the group right there. And let's connect. Let's start dreaming together, and let's really start changing the world around us. So head on over to Facebook, join the Jumblethink Facebook group, and let's dream together. Now let's return to this conversation as we explore some ways to face the fears you're facing.
Mettre l'aiguille sur le disque. Mettez le contact. Reposez votre bras.
We are back, and in this segment, I'm going to be giving you some tips, some practical ways you can address the fears that you're facing. Again, we started this conversation by talking about coronavirus and this hysteria that is growing around it. Some of it warranted, some of it legitimate, and some of it overreaction. I wanted to give you some tips in this journey of chasing big ideas and dreams when it comes to facing those fears, the story of the pandemic of fear. Fear is something that we can address. Fear is something that is sometimes real and sometimes imagined, but it is something that always needs to be addressed. It's something that should be faced. It should be overcome. If the fear is irrational, then you have to move past it. If the fear is real, you have to figure out a way to get around it. Obstacles are there to overcome, and many of us live in a place where something traps us. A fear traps us in a place that we never move past. Now, other areas of our lives may move forward, but that one area, it holds us back. Today, I wanted to give you some tips. So here are 5 tips that we're going to look at for really addressing the fear in your life. Step number 1 is to step back and look at reality. Often our fears are imagined from the place of what if. What if this goes wrong? What if I don't know the answer? What if my business fails? What if I trust someone and they let me down? Fear is often driven by expectation that dictates our response. When we step back and look at reality, we can see if the fear is rational or not rational. We can look at data. What is data telling us? What is the information telling us? Is this fear warranted? Is it not? We can get around people. Maybe it's a mentor, a coach. It could be your family, your friends, and they can give you perspective that you don't see. You may say, "Oh, I'm afraid to lose my job because the economy's tanking," but then you look at it and you say, "Well, that's an irrational fear because of whatever that is." And then we look at clear perspective. Sometimes the fear is driven by a perspective that's not healthy. Our perspective, our worldview is conditioned in such a way that the fear seems more rational than the solutions around the fear, or that the fear doesn't really warrant the emotions that we're experiencing. So we need to get that perspective. By stepping back, by taking time and being proactive, we can get an assessment of what's going on and we can make a plan forward. And that's tip number 2. Figure out how to face the fear. If the fear is irrational, you have to come up with a plan to overcome it. If the fear is irrational, you have to create a plan to move past it too. All of this takes intention. And often I think that we think that the fear will just go away, when the truth is that you have to face the fear to get over the fear. Whether the fear is irrational or rational, it doesn't really matter. You have to have a plan forward. By figuring out how to face the fear and address it, you can move past it. Until you address the fear, it's going to continue to hang over you and be a death trap for your future, the future in the area that the fear is dictating. By creating a plan, you can address it, you can face it, you can move past it. You must face the fear. You can't just ignore it. That's tip number 2. Tip number 3, walk with someone who has already faced the fear. Who could that be? Well, let's say you want to start a business, but you're afraid to start a business. Get around other business owners who have been down that road and let them give you the perspective you need. You don't know how to face the fear because you've never been there, but somebody who has already done it can give you a perspective that you don't have, and it can help squash some of the fear. It can help you give a plan around the fear. It can help you address the fear, but without that perspective, you don't have a way forward. Now, it could be somebody who's already been down it, but it could also be a professional. So maybe your fear is less about a vocation or a situation and more about maybe you have the fear of death because your parents died when you were very young and you're afraid the same thing's going to happen to you. You need to talk to someone that's a professional, a doctor, a psychologist that can walk through that fear with you. By trying to walk through the fear by yourself, you're setting yourself up for failure. So walk with people who have been down this road before. Walk down the road with an expert to help you along that journey. That's tip number 3. Tip number 4, don't define yourself by the fear. Don't let fear rule you. Often we take on our fears as our identity. A good example of that is maybe somebody's afraid to fly. So instead of facing the fear to fly or figuring out ways around that fear, they just say, "Oh, I'm just not a traveler. I'm a homebody." Now, the truth may be that they have every desire in the world to travel. They want to go see places, that you may want to go see places. But the fear is holding you back, and so you define your own identity, I'm not a traveler in this case, as the truth instead of facing the fear and seeing the truth thereof that you love the experience of traveling. You just don't like flying. You must face the fear instead of defining yourself as the fear. And don't let the fear rule you. That's the second part of this. Fear, when it becomes your identity, dictates your decisions. You don't want the fear to dictate your decisions. You want to be able to make wise decisions that you set you up for a future, a success, a victory in your life. So don't define yourself by the fear. Don't let fear rule you. Don't let that become your identity. And finally, tip number 5. Learn what you need to do to address the fear. Now, tips 1 through 4 will set you up for this, but sometimes if you have a fear, simply learning about the fear can help you overcome it. Now, I'm not talking about the WebMD solution, which is, I think I'm sick. I go to WebMD, I look up my symptoms, and then I self-diagnose myself so that Now I have a condition, and now I'm afraid of life because I obviously have the worst thing in the world. Let's step back. Look at tip number 3. Walk with someone who has already faced the fear. In this case, that might be a doctor. They've already faced it through education. They've learned about the symptoms and can then actually diagnose you with the truth. Sometimes your fear isn't rational because it's not the real thing. You're afraid of something that isn't the reality. Well, what's another way you can learn ways to address the fear? Well, you could take an online course. If you're afraid, you love singing, but you're afraid of performing in front of people, you could take a class on how to perform in front of people, how to overcome stage fright. Maybe you want to be an entrepreneur and start multiple businesses, and you have dreams and ideas that you're excited about. Well, how can you learn about it? Maybe go to Harvard Business School and take one of their online courses, their entrepreneurial essentials class. Take that and get some tools and resources. This isn't about diagnosing the path forward. Sometimes this is about learning the gaps where you don't have the knowledge to face the fear, and then addressing it by learning the strategies forward. Now, this method, this tip here, doesn't always work, but you can always learn more. Maybe you have a fear of flying, and then you start researching, well, what's the data? Well, hardly any planes ever crash. And then you learn how a plane works, and then you experience a pilot and talking to them about their expertise. And so now you've learned past the fear. You've taken the truth and filled the fear with the truth. Maybe you want to be an amazing chef, but you don't know how to start a restaurant. You know how to cook food, but you don't know how to run a business. Well, you could take a class at a business school or at a community college that talks about the business of food, the business of restaurants. You could take and learn from a coach or a mentor and learn what you need. So there's many ways to learn. Sometimes it's through an expert, sometimes it's through a curriculum, but learn what you need to address the fear. So let's look back at these 5 tips. Tip number 1, step back and look at reality. Look at the data, get feedback from people, and respond with perspective. Tip number 2, figure out how to face the fear. Create a plan. Without a plan, as they say, people perish. So come up with a plan that sets you up for the best chance of success, and then adjust your plan as you learn, grow, and evolve the situations that you are facing. Tip number 3, walk with someone who has already faced the fear. Walk with an expert, somebody who's already done what you've wanted to do. They're going to be able to give you perspective on the truth versus the fear. They're going to be able to give you strategies to overcome the fear, and they're going to be able to give you a leg up over trying to do it by yourself. Tip number 4 was, don't define yourself by fear. Don't let fear rule you. Your identity is not defined by your fear. You need to address the fear, and you need to become the fullness of who you are created to be. And finally, tip number 5, learn what you need to address to face the fear. This could be by taking a class. This could be sitting down with a coach or mentor. This could be taking an online course or going to a community college or a school to learn what you need to do to face the fear. The pandemic of fear is real. It is as real as the diseases we face, but often it is actually the more dangerous of the pandemics, of the epidemics. When you have fear, it dictates your decisions. Your decisions are a response to emotion. Those things will drive you to failure. When you have the truth, when you have understanding, when you have data, when you have knowledge, you can face the fear, address the fear, and move forward with truth. Don't let the epidemic of fear define your life. Step back and address it in a wise and thoughtful way. So here's my challenge to you today. Fear is very real and sometimes much more dangerous than the diseases we face. It is a literal ticking time bomb to our own self-destruction. If fear defines us, if fear drives us, then we can never step into what we're created to do. We can never step into the fullness of our identity. We can never fully step into the possibilities of what we could create. Don't let that ticking time bomb destroy you. Face the pandemic, face the epidemic of fear, and address it with wisdom, with knowledge, with people around you who can help support you. By addressing the fear, by stepping into this pandemic and overcoming it, you will grow stronger. You will grow more resolute. You will grow more into the possibilities of a future that defines greatness for you. The epidemic of fear is one that ravages all of us, and only those who face the fear, the pandemic, can overcome it. There is no magic cure. There is no pill that you can take. There is no solution for this pandemic that is easy. You have to do the hard work of stepping into the fear, to push into the fear, to push past the fear, to see the potential of where it could lead you. That's my challenge to you today, is to take that step, to take the unknown, to take the journey of addressing this pandemic of fear. You don't have to take a huge step, just take a small step today and begin the journey of saying, you know what, this fear has held me back too long. This fear has captivated my mind and imagination for longer than it should have. This fear has defined me, and it's not the truth. Take and push into that fear, push past that fear into the possibilities, to the dreams, the identity, the destiny that you have. It's time to do the work. It's time to put in the hard effort. So that's my challenge to you today. What will you do today to face this pandemic of fear? Thanks for tuning in. I hope that today's episode has encouraged you, whether it's your fear of the coronavirus, whether it's the fear of chasing that dream you have. I hope that it's given you some tips and some tricks to walk past the fear, the pandemic of fear, and into the dreams, the ideas, the destiny that you have. Now it's up to you. Will you get out there today? Will you dream big? Will you take the steps necessary to face the fear? And will you change the world around you?
Dans quelques mois, lorsque vous aurez bien saisi la technique et que vous serez maître de votre corps, vous pourrez vous décontracter même en travaillant.